is
I
going.
see that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, good evening, Soulfire. Hope you guys are all having a wonderful evening this evening. Welcome to Curses, the Unbinding. I'm here tonight. I'm Molly Maloney. I'm here tonight with Thomas Mooneagle. And
hello,
Thomas,
everybody.
you'd like to tell us a little bit about you and about what we're going to be delving into tonight.
Right. I wanted to first wish everybody happy holidays. We're in the midst of Hanukkah right now, and Monday we've got Yule, the solstice, and then the following Friday we've got Christmas, and the Friday after that we got New Year's. So we're like right in the thick of holiday madness, and a lot of things come up at the holidays. Mm-hmm. So a lot of emotions, both good. I mean, I'm not saying it's all bad. I mean, there's a lot of good things that come up in the holidays, but for some of us, there's also a lot of bad things that come up or into our mind. Particularly if we've had estrangement with family members or loved ones in general. And for this holiday season, especially since most of us are socially distancing and isolated, we're experiencing a different kind of loss this year.
Right.
And that brings up sort of, anything that's not been healed in ourselves is going to be knocking at our doors for attention. And so usually when I talk about curses, people get into like, casting spells and hexes and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, that's really the most minor, like that's the smallest part of the whole topic of curses. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite quotes is from the Wandering Oracle, and it is, "A curse is a lie that we believe about ourselves."
Right.
And really, that's kind of how I look at curses, is that it's a lie that we believe about ourselves. And people go, "Oh, that's not that big of a deal." I'm like, well, actually, it kind of is. Because what happens is we're growing up, we hear things about ourselves. And those voices in our heads become our voice in our heads as we move forward in life. And then it becomes our job to kind of unwind a lot of that and to see like that voice that I thought was me telling me that I'm not worth it was actually this person's voice from my past, whether it's a family member, a friend, or a first lover, whatever, But, if we hear something often enough, it starts to sound like our own thoughts instead of somebody else's idea or perception of ourselves. And that can be really dangerous for us because we then operate under that, and it limits what we see. It limits how we see ourselves. And we can start to treat ourselves really cruelly. And that again, it spirals, and it's like, it's like when you get a knot in your hair and then other stuff gets caught in it, and it's getting gnarlier, and it's get more knotted the whole time. And then so you have to go back and like slowly kind of take one strand at a time out until you get it back down to that one little piece, and then you can go flick it out.
Right. So a question that comes up for me when we're hearing you talk about curses. So, I mean, obviously in the coaching and mindfulness communities, we talk a lot about limiting beliefs. Mm-hmm. So is that the same thing? Are they?
A little bit. I mean, most curses are forms of limitations. Mm-hmm. And again, not every curse is meant to be that when it's said.
Right.
And I think that's really important for people to grasp, that like my mother told me this. That doesn't mean that your mother hated you.
Right.
It means that from her perspective and her point in time, she was trying to do something probably to protect you or prepare you for the world. But just the way you received it and subsequent events may have colored that original thing and given it a different context. Or, sometimes it does mean that your mom was kind of mean. I mean, or your dad or your uncle or your grandparents. It doesn't, or, your school teachers. That's another, common one from young age. If you're, how many of us had like talks too much written on their report card when the first like couple years they were in school, and then later on in life have a hard time vocalizing, have a hard time speaking up, have a hard time in social situations because we were constantly quieted down. And again, that was not done to like, hurt us. It was done because they had to conduct the classroom. They had to like get a certain amount of material taught to, usually an overcrowded class. So
right.
A lot of things were not done on purpose to hurt us, and yet they end up hurting us if we don't see to them, if we don't, separate out what's us and what's not us. And if we don't have a really clear version and a clear centered version of who we are and what we are. And most of us don't.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Without doing some big work, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But we take ownership of those things the way that people define us, because it's kind of our only,
Right. It's the mirror. I mean, we see ourselves through our interactions quite a bit, unless we've trained ourselves to, do a lot of deep meditation for, decades.
Right.
And then that's a different, there's a different kind of knowledge that comes about yourself when you're by yourself and when you're contemplating with yourself, as opposed to when you're in relationship with something else. So we're always in relationship to something. Mm-hmm. Whether it's relationship with ourselves, which is really important that we have that, whether it's relationships to our families, whether it's relationships to our societies, our work, our career, our romantic, if we have that going on, our friends, but also how we relate to the world, to nature, to the world of spirit. So, and with shamanism particularly, it's all about managing relationships, and starting with yourself and spirit, and and working out from there, and then healing those relationships and making sure that they're in balance.
Right. It's a lot of moving pieces if you're trying to.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Tangle.
That's why healing can be really messy, because it's not just usually one thing. And even if you go, when you do deep self work, what I call deep self protocol, when I'm going in there, I'm going, oh, I see something back here when you were 4 years old. Here, we move that out. And it's almost like taking a block out of the Jenga tower. Mm-hmm. And everything has to move with it. And so you have to be, just like when you're playing Jenga, you got to be real careful when you bring that one out. You got to be same when you are working at someone with deep trauma levels, that you have to work really compassionately and very carefully, and very, in some cases, slow. You have to go step. You might see everything that needs to happen, but you're like, okay, this is the piece that we can do right now.
Sure.
And then you got to settle.
Yeah. And I would assume, it's not only what you have access to, but also what is ready to be released at that particular moment.
Right. And, you have to give people time to adjust, because a lot of our identities, particularly with curses, the problem is, as I said, it's a lie we believe about ourselves. So that means our identity is hung on some portion of that. And when you alter something that someone's identity is hanging on, that itself, even though it's healing, even though you're taking away that something is not true and is not really them, it can feel traumatic.
Sure. If I'm not that thing anymore, what am I?
What am I? Exactly. It's unmooring, and it's very disorienting for some time, and can be very anxiety provoking, simply because it's, one of the most frightening things is to not know who you are.
Sure. Yeah.
So
I've had that moment recently, and it's interesting because I've had it on an energetic level through some of the work that we've done, moving pieces out, and it's like the image, it's like an excavation. Well, then everything that's on top is kind of like starts to sink down and filter down where that piece used to be. And so, there is a little bit of disorientation and a little bit, it's unsettling. And so
And I think one of the best things, and this happens a lot when I do extraction and soul retrieval work, which is related in a sense, because, when you get rid of something that's not you, part of you gets to come back.
Right.
But then that settling in, there has to be an integration period where you get reacquainted, kind of with yourself and your energy. And I'll never forget, one of the first times I did like really powerful, like healing, like a extraction, probably on the borderline of a depossession, and then soul retrieval work. And I was like, oh, that person's going to feel a little weird for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
And sure enough, their wife called me and said, so-and-so has been, I was like, I was wondering about that. I was like, are they feeling like kind of anxious and unsettled and uncertain? And like, yeah. I said, oh yeah, just tell them that's normal. That's part of the whole process, because we move stuff and now he's got to reacclimate. It's like, it'll pass. Yeah. And a lot of times just telling people that will settle the anxiety down, or at least it will give it a context, because then you start worrying like, what's wrong with me? What if something's wrong with me? And then you spiral with those thoughts if you tend to be at all anxiety prone. But even if you're not, when you do deep level work, it is unsettling. Yeah. And if you go too fast.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. So for everybody that's coming in, first of all, I want to say hi to Laura. Laura said hello to us. Laura and Pelizari. She's here with us tonight. As you guys are filtering in, if you do have comments, go ahead and leave those in the comment sections or questions, and we will do our best to get to those. We're talking about curses tonight, and you and I did some work, and it was really powerful work, and we moved some energy and released some things, and it's to what we were just talking about. I'm still going through a period where I feel so much more settled, and I feel so much more present and balanced, and I have been dealing with significantly less anxiety, which sounds amazing, but it has been a period of adjustment, because that's been such a part of my baseline for so long, that operating out in the world without that anxiety is still something that I'm getting used to. Which it sounds like such a strange thing, but it is. There's been a period of big adjustment for that.
Yeah, and I think one of the I guess you'd say paths of healing I studied was all about instant transformation and having things happen, like because it's using the quantum field and all that, and you can do that. And for some things, that's great. Oh, you got a little twinge up here. You want to, that's fine. You're not really attached to you haven't wrapped your whole identity around, I got twinges in my back right now, so that's fine. But for long-term things, I found that some of that work you can use portions of it, but you have to be real careful and delicate and slow and build in time around it for things to happen. And because you can break yourself, you can break people doing that. And I know this because I am my number one guinea pig, and I broke myself. Yeah. And it took months to get to functional. And then, I would have, kind of like resurgences of that, deep things, what we call it, existential dread. Right. That would pop back up, and it took years, really. And occasionally I will still have stuff, pop up. It's like, oh, you thought you dealt with everything, huh? Nope, here it goes, right in your face. Yeah. So I know from experience, from personal experience, you have to really be gentle. And I'm glad I learned that with myself instead of a client, Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm sure your clients and me too.
Yeah. So now when I do new stuff, I test it beforehand, and I usually have, a couple of friends, my circle of beta testers, and I'm like, okay, I've got this new thing I'm trying out, and it's people who I trust and who trust me, So if anything happens, we have that rapport built in, and we can go and see, okay, what needs to happen to gentle this, And it looks like my light's fading, so I'm going to switch over to that. There we go.
While you're doing that, Jamie jumped on with us and has said hello. Hey, Jamie. Hello. How are you? Again, as you're coming on, if you guys have questions, comments, things that you are interested in having Thomas answer about the subject of curses or anything that we're talking about tonight, feel free and leave those in the comments.
Yeah, I know people are gonna be like, oh, when is the hoodoo stuff start? And I'll be like, oh. I mean, that's really, like I said, it's rare. I always tell people that when we're talking about curses, it's both more common and more rare than you think. And that's what I mean by that. Like because most of us are operating under at least a dozen curses all the time that we've picked up over lifetimes. And when I say a dozen curses, I don't mean like someone's is sticking pins in us, little poppets. What I mean is like people have said stuff about us and we've believed them. And then we carry that with us, and that continually affects our energies and our life outcomes. So, I mean, I can give you a personal example of somebody, I used to have this thing where I could be asleep physically, but still be mentally awake. And I had really weird hours as a teenager because I went to a magnet school. So I had to ride on the bus for an hour or so to get there. So I was up really super early. So anytime I could sleep, I would do it. So, and I remember being at a family gathering and hearing somebody saying this about me. They thought I was asleep. And they said, he better make a lot of money or be really handy around the house where no one's going to ever, want him.
Oh, goodness.
And that was somebody that, I was really close to. So that stuck with me for many, many years. And people always tell me like, why are you still single? I can really point to that because I like literally believed it for years and years and years. And I've been starting to unravel that in the past year because I can't ignore it because we're all stuck at home.
Right. Yeah. This has definitely been, for coursework, shadow work, this has definitely been the year for it.
Yeah. You can't ignore it. It's right here, right in front of you. Don't have any distractions. You can only binge watch so much before you're just brain dead and then you want something else, right? And it's like things like that, little phrases can do, it's like the first pebble in an avalanche, like down slope, they can cause massive shifts.
Like that butterfly effect. In a different way. And I think it's really interesting. It's funny you mentioned like the hoodoo curses, and I was dating a guy for a while that had been dating somebody before me, and she went on vacation to New Orleans and paid somebody a French Quarter to put a curse on our relationship. And of course, it's not something that maybe it did affect our relationship, but I think us falling apart was a good thing. But that's so often what we think of when we think of curses is that, like you said, the hoodoo
right. And I don't mean to pick on them at all because I know people in those traditions who are like way above board, super integrity. I will let them work on me. I use that because it's common sort of in the pop culture. Like most people can kind of in their heads get their mind wrapped around that. When they think of curses, they think of that.
Sure.
And, but I've seen people who use, not just like the common curse, but will use and wrap power around things. I've had that directed at me. I've seen that directed at other people.
Yeah.
And those can be really nasty too. But the thing is that people are afraid of, but it's also really uncommon.
Right. And so, talking about the curses that we, the things that we pick up and carry and believe about ourselves, I think, so often they're so woven into our baseline that even sitting here listening to us talking about it, may not be something that a listener would register as something that they are carrying. So because it's so subtle and it's some of the stuff we've been carrying with us for years. So what's a good way to start the process of exploring and seeing what you're holding in your system, or seeing what might be, floating in the background as a kind of curse type energy?
Sure. I think the first thing is to, examine areas of your life where you have the most problems.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where do you feel the most stuck? Where have you experienced the most pain, the most trauma repeatedly, like where you seem to repeat stuff?
Right.
And then it becomes listening to yourself, particularly as you talk about yourself, your thought patterns as you're going over a problem, and the things that you say to yourself that if you were to say to any other person that you care about, you would think that you were the worst person ever, but it's okay because you're saying it to you.
That
right?
Self-talk, yeah.
So, and one of the reasons this has also come up is it's like I've been working through the medicine wheels and all the chakras, and I just reached the throat chakra.
Right.
And what's been coming up again and again is like, your words that you're using have power.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to listen to how you talk to yourself. And I think that really gives us the most clues to where, think about what you're most dissatisfied with yourself about,
mm-hmm.
and think about how you describe yourself in that way.
Interesting.
And then that's going to start to shed light on like, okay, this is where I need to look.
Yeah. Like you mentioned the throat chakra, and I know for myself personally, that is one of those places that I recognize very clearly that I have, it's something that I struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing when I'm in kind of anything that's, work related, whether it's my actual 9-to-5 job or, something like this where we're making a thing to present to people. I can kind of compartmentalize, but if it's just me on my own, and I'm having to have some sort of, especially vulnerable conversations, like this just clams right up and it makes it very
yes
and I mean it's almost impossible. And so delving in and I can guarantee there's obvious things there's a reason for that. There's something in my system that I'm holding on to that makes that a thing, but getting in and starting to do the work about
right it. And I think part of this is, if I speak it, it's true, right? If I say it out loud, it must be true. And I've seen this in circle with people. One of the, when I've taken medicine wheel classes with Vicky Joe, Vicky Joe Dietz, yeah.
I know her name. I don't know if we've ever met, but I definitely know her name.
Yeah. I will tell you, if you want to be real uncomfortable, because it's funny, you go around the circle and you can see exactly every other person what they need to say and get out, and you're like, but they're all like, don't tell them, don't help them, they got to say it, and they go and they get, it just seems so easy, it's so obvious, and then that gets to you and you stutter, you cannot get it out, you can't say it, and it's because it's so locked in, you're so inside of it. That it's so hard to get out, and that's why it's important to do it. And it's like, it would be feel so uncomfortable when the spotlight's on you. And you'd go, and then but afterwards, after doing the class, you'd feel better,
right
and then you'd go back for the next space on the wheel, and you'd be right in that uncomfortable tension, thinking, why am I doing this to myself?
Right.
But I keep coming back and doing these things that put me in really uncomfortable things and positions, and it's because that's the only way it's gonna come out.
Right.
And then that's not to say that all work has to be like super uncomfortable and like just cut you to the core. It doesn't. But that can be part of an experience.
Sure. Yeah. And that, I think with any kind of energy work that we do, that's always a possibility where you're getting in there and having to deal with that really, really uncomfortable stuff.
Surprise.
Yeah, exactly. Or, you think you're dealing with one thing and it's like, it kind of reminds me of the magician with the scarf. Like you think it's just one thing and it just keeps coming. It's attached to 17 different things.
Yeah, exactly. It's, I'll never forget the time I was working on somebody and they have what I call ghost chakras. And that means like this other condition that they had, the pattern had set up its own like phantom chakra system to power it and to leech off of the other energy systems. Yeah. And so I'm like, so we remove the thing and it would pop back up because we would recreate it with that phantom. So you have to remove all of that. And so really it's really like getting to the root. If you're weeding in certain plant, you got to get it from that root. You got to, it's just going to pop right back. And that's kind of and it's, again, not that you can't rediscover an issue later on or have it come back in a different way. Yeah. Because I've had that where it's, the same issue. The next time it's a little less intense. And then time after that's a little less intense, but continually circling around. And for me, particularly in relationships, it was, I've let myself be treated really poorly. And it's because of being alone that, you're just starved for interaction, starved for company, starved for this. So you put up with things. Yeah. And I think so many of us put up with things because it's the only way we're going to get our needs met, even if they're met poorly. Right. Or we pay a very heavy price for that. And I know that this all does relate into like that curse, the lie that we believe about ourselves. Right. The lie is, hey, for me, the example I give is like that I'm unlovable, right? Mm-hmm. And therefore I should be grateful for any attention I get, even if it's not great attention, even if they're not really nice or kind, or I get taken for granted, or all of those things. And so it creates this whole constellation of then other problems that you have to solve because you are operating from the space of that I am unlovable, right? Right. Which has its own pain to it too. But then you have these other, like, people are abusive, this and that feeds the cycle. And then we also have other, here's a very common one. I'm a failure, right? Or I'm not good at that. Right. Or, right. That's another, I'm not this kind, I'm not a people person, or I'm not this kind of, yeah. And I've had that because I'm very strange. We're all very strange. I don't like a lot of the things that's like the most popular thing or this, and I don't interact in that same way. And I thought that, that there was something wrong with me. It's like, no, that's just not how you're going to interact. Mm-hmm. And I think, that's where it starts. It's like, that's not for me. And the fact that they don't get me does not mean that I am wrong. It just means that they're not the people that are going to get me. Right. Right. And I'm sorry to use personal references here, but I think that's somehow more powerful for people, so they could probably see that in themselves. Yeah, absolutely. And I feel more comfortable using personal references than, saying stuff about clients. So that makes sense. Yeah. And I think it's also useful because, even if you're in this field, you're still, in the healing process. Always. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Until you, maybe when I get up into my 70s or 80s, I'll be like, yeah, that doesn't bother me anymore. Well, and so much of it too is, one of the things in this year you talked about, this year has been such an incubator for this kind of work. It's felt like because of the fact that so many of us have been forced to, spend a lot of time by ourselves, where we can't get, get out and avoid our things by, socializing and other things that we normally do. But it's, it's not only,
the things about myself that I've picked up from people immediately in my life, it's also a lot of ancestral shit that's been handed.
Yes, that
I
is,
found so
yeah.
much this year of, I thought it was just a thing between, me and my mother or me and my father, but then being able to see, no, this is something that has been handed down from one generation to the next.
Right. And I can look at my own family and see that too, because, it's sad because a lot of times we don't find out some of these stories until after someone has passed.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because we just don't talk about that, right?
Right.
But for me, it was like my maternal grandmother, when she was a little child, her father died and her mother couldn't afford to take care of her and her sister, so she had to put him in the orphanage run by the nuns.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that environment was not very kind or conducive at the time. And it explains a lot why my grandmother had a hard time getting along with other women.
Mm-hmm.
And then that, troubling interaction, between her and my mother, then between my mother and some of my sisters, and that spirals.
See the pattern. Yeah.
Exactly. You see it down the line for different things. And if you've had other kind of traumas in your family history, the interaction pattern gets passed down. I mean, I'm just 1 or 2 generations removed from the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
And attitudes and everything about work, about money, about what is valued, and how you raise your children because of that.
Yeah.
Gets passed down. And right now, because of COVID, we've got simultaneously, we have a pandemic. We have racial injustice coming to a head, needs to.
Mm-hmm.
And simultaneously, an economic crisis is bubbling, just as big as the Great Depression, really.
Yeah.
And to say that that's not going to affect us and generations that come after us because of the trauma, particularly if we don't address the needs that are there,
mm-hmm.
That's going to get handed down, unfortunately. So and we're at a space right now, at least because of the internet, because of social consciousness, that we are more aware of some of these things. Even if we don't look at it from a spiritual perspective, if we look at it from just a psychological perspective, we're much more, as a society, aware
mm-hmm.
of those factors and how they influence people and how they influences, our families and going forward. So
one of the things that I noticed was, for instance, and this is something that's been really kind of in the forefront for me for the past couple of weeks. And it's interesting because at the outset, this doesn't seem like something I would view as a curse, but it is, in a sense. It's this attitude around hard work and the nobility of struggle. And,
yes.
And so it does come down, this is something that's been passed down generationally. And of course, from that Depression era, if not before, and, this concept of, you got to work hard, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You've got to, life is unfair and everybody has to struggle. I mean, we hear this stuff all the time, right. And it becomes so ingrained. And I've been doing a lot of personal, I was laying in bed the other night and it just kind of dropped in. Is that true? Do we have to struggle? Does that have to be such an ingrained part of our lives? Or is that something that I have picked up and held onto and decided to carry with me? It's kind of a curse type energy.
Yeah, it really is. And I think you've kind of keyed into like the first part of like starting to untangle all the messes, is to start to ask yourself, is this true? And particularly interrupting your thoughts when you're thinking about yourself or a situation, particularly when you've put like a hopeless mix onto it, which I have done a lot in the past few months for various reasons. This is hopeless. I don't know how I'm going to make this thing or this thing, or, I don't know. And is to really step back and go, is that true?
Yeah.
I mean, it feels true right now at this moment, but is it?
And does it feel true because I've decided to make that work? I've employed that in my life.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with hard work. I don't think there's really anything wrong with struggle, as long as it is not a whole way of life. Because we're all going to have things that we struggle with at some point in our life. But our whole life should not be about struggle. It really shouldn't be. That's not what life is. Life is also about celebration, joy. It is about grieving and loss as well. That is part of it. But, where we have emblazoned and made martyrdom, oh so sacred. And, there was, the Wandering Oracle had another one that was like, society tends to that doesn't meet the needs of its people tends to glorify struggle,
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Yes.
And that's what we're seeing. So what we're having personal curses interacting with ancestral curses, interacting with societal curses.
Yep. Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of that come to a head right now. I mean,
it seems like it's all coming to a head right now.
Right.
And so, I mean, everywhere that you look, it's just kind of.
It's because we've just decided not to address some of these things.
Yeah.
Until we can't. I mean, really, systemic racism, we could have addressed that at any time in the past several decades.
Right.
If we really wanted to. If we didn't want to just push it under the rug and not be uncomfortable about it, we just, let's just sweep that under there, shall we?
Right.
Same thing with, universal health care. Because right now people are talking about that who were kind of like, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think everyone should get that. They should have to work for, And now we're in the middle of a pandemic where a lot of people are out of work. We're in a space where everybody else's health affects your health. Right. And maybe even if for only selfish reasons, it might be a good idea if everybody had access. So it's, these are not accidents. A lot of things are being maneuvered together to solve things that are not sustainable. And that comes with our own self in our own personal lives too. We can shoulder a curse for so long until it becomes pretty much unsustainable in our lives. And that's, and it would be so much nicer if we just didn't let it get to that point.
Absolutely. And if you wouldn't mind, you mentioned that quote or something just a moment ago about society, that society that can't meet the needs of its citizens.
Yeah, let me see if I can find that. I keep a.
Then we've got a question too.
Sure.
But I thought that was such a great quote.
Wandering Oracle has a lot of interesting things. Actually, what he said was, the less a society provides for the needs of its people, the more it tries to control them.
Yeah.
And
But I like what you said better.
Yeah, well, I mean,
which was like the less a society meets the needs of its people, the more that it tries to romanticize struggle. It's kind of
that's because he had a similar one that he said. It was, when a society doesn't meet the needs of its people, it develops a mythology around the nobility of suffering.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and we totally have that right now. Yeah. And but yeah, the more we untangle from our own personal and ancestral curses, the easier it is to start to see some of the larger ones around us.
Yeah.
And going like, oh, I just bought into this. Why? Because that's the way it is,
Yeah.
This is not The Mandalorian. This is the way.
Right. But it's, you talk about that ancestral piece and specifically with something like struggle, coming down from the Depression era generation that then became the World War II era generation. And so you kind of get this mythology.
Sure. And again, at the time, a lot of these things were put in place. They were not curses. They were what you needed to do to survive. They were, they helped.
Yes.
So again, context.
Yes.
But it's the way they get passed, how they get passed, when we add moral strength to it. So it might be better to say something like, instead of like, sometimes you have to strive, sometimes you have to sacrifice. It should be more, what we could update this is like, sometimes there are times where you have to come together and help each other and be helped. And I think that's a better way of encapsulating the energy.
Yeah.
And really is more balanced, is less likely to be taken. And, it's still people who like to control other people will still try and take that and twist it and do stuff with it. But if you use your language carefully, and we message things carefully, it has less of a likelihood of that happening. And I think that's really, the idea that words have power.
Yes.
And it's really important to know what your words are doing. And particularly social media, and I'm guilty of this, where you just react and you say stuff, right?
Yeah.
And, you're just zinging those arrows out. Got to get those likes.
Right.
But that is, we really have to think about our words. We listen to respond. We listen, to talk back, not to hear a lot of times. And it's really important to listen and hold space, because a lot of times when you tell people their problems or something, you don't want them to fix you. You want them to hear you. You don't want them to tell you how your feelings are wrong, which is a lot of times what people's response does.
Yeah. And I think one of the key factors to that too is that, we live in a culture that is pretty emotionally illiterate. And so, that has so many consequences, where we see them in, the Facebook comment thread, or, just in the ways that parents speak to their children. And going back to the, the Depression era grandmother, who went through an immense amount of suffering that she probably wasn't really able to quantify or really understand, but went through so much suffering. And then there's kind of a fear point where, we don't want to go through that again, and we don't want our children to suffer. So we implant in them, I had this horrible experience, and even if they haven't, even if they haven't really, they don't understand where it's coming from, there's still a fear piece where they're like, I don't want you to suffer, so you need to work hard, you need to, and beliefs around lack and all of the things that get passed down from one another. So it's interesting. And one of the things that I've had to do over the past, again, through this 2020 experience is really start to, be aware of what, how I am feeling and how it's triggering, words to come out, and really starting to do the deep dive of where is that coming from? What is that linked to? Where is the origin of that? And it's been a long process.
Yeah, why do I feel this way? Or why am I so quick to judge this person?
Yes. What is that actually extending?
Why do I think I know what this other person deserves? And then I look back and I'm like, well, it's because you don't think you deserve anything good either. And and you go like, well, why is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And then you wind up down this, and you go amazing like, healing.
Oh, I've been a real asshole to myself.
Yep. Yep. Jamie asked us, he said, how do you begin to work on ancestral curses that have been passed down? So we've kind of been touching on
we've been kind of like dancing around the whole thing and like giving the lay of the land. One of the things that I did, and I came up with this about 8 years ago, I put together ancestral healing kind of method that I do. And it came out of working with a friend who I was in a shamanic group with. We were both going through advanced training at the time. And she had just had her first child. And she was talking, she's like, I need to do some work with you, because she's like, I've been feeling really weird and off, and I've been responding in these crazy ways and stuff. And I just looked at her and I said, let me ask you a question. She said, yeah. And I said, did this happen did this start right after you had your baby? And she's like, yeah. And I said, oh, your mommy program's just turned on. And she's like, what do you mean? And I said, oh, those are ancestral stuff. They wouldn't have turned on unless you had a child.
Right.
And so like, and I'm like, it's not that they're particularly bad. They're just outdated. I mean, you know?
Right. Yeah.
We're not in the 5th century anymore. So some of those programs really don't do any good, you know?
Absolutely. And it is, you know, it's one of the things that it's really become clear for me over the past couple of months too. And my process for getting into my ancestral stuff really I started looking really closely at my relationship with my parents and started noticing patterns between, you know, my relationship with them and then their relationship with their parents, and was able to start tracing that back. And, you know, it's been in that process, you know, I do journey work a lot. And so I was doing a plant medicine journey and came across some ancestral pieces, and was able to do a really big healing around that, where, you know, kind of the result of that was me coming into understanding that, you know, all of the, you know, that fear that they had experienced themselves and then wanted to protect me from. And so they passed down this piece of, you know, broken ideology or whatever it was, was meant for protection. It was meant to be a good thing. It was meant to teach me or give me something. And, realizing that, I can appreciate that and where that comes from without having to own it. It doesn't have to be something that I have to carry on. And so that was able to help me release quite a bit of some of the stuff that I was carrying, or at least start the process around.
Yeah. And that's important, to just even to realize is that most people are trying to do the best that they can do. Sometimes their best is pretty crappy, but
yeah.
And some people are, it's true. Some people really aren't trying, but most, like the majority of people are really trying their best just to do it. Right.
Yeah.
And it really helps, with family too, that most of them doing the best they can. Sometimes, they're trying to do it with pieces that are missing, or with broken pieces, or, sharp edges. And again, that's not to excuse like severe trauma or stuff that's been passed down. It's merely an explanation, not an excuse, just an explanation. But a lot of for most, for the most common things that get passed down that aren't, heavily aimed and traumatic and abusive, but still cause problems. It's people trying to do their best but screwing up.
Yeah. I've got a really, really somebody I know that's trying to protect their privacy, but this piece was such a massive thing. They were going through trying to deal with trauma from that came from their father as they were growing up. And their father was extraordinarily, really harsh when it came to grades, and was very, very hard on them about them, achieving grades of a certain level. And to the point that it seemed obsessive and, really over the top. And you know, through the process of trying to untangle all of that, you know, he was able to uncover the fact that, you know, his father was in college during the Vietnam era. And at that point, grades were insanely important. If you didn't have the right grade level, of course, you were in danger of being drafted and sent to war. And so there was such immense pressure to keep grades up. And that's something that he, you know, his dad carried and then tried to pass on with that same kind of life or death urgency, even though that life or death situation no longer existed.
Right. Yeah. Again, it's like the program is outdated.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. They're trying to protect them with broken, you know.
Right. And that goes to, if, you know, when they ask you, okay, what do you want to be? And you tell them something and they're like, oh, you can't do that. You're going to starve if you do that. And it's, again, that protective, like, I don't want you to starve. Therefore, I'm going to dissuade you from doing this by telling you that you'll never succeed at that.
Yep.
And, you know, and again, cruel, yes. But also coming from a place of concern. I mean,
right. Absolutely.
So, I mean, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, so as far as, you know, starting to untangle all of this, it sounds like, you know, the best place to start is just with a basic curiosity about.
Yeah. Starting to question. I think, you know, starting to ask questions. You have to kind of know where you're going to be doing your energy work before you do your energy work, right? Whether that's shamanic, Reiki, any other form of quantum healing. You want to have a focus, because that's where you're going to be able to start to track it and then use that energy to help you start to untangle it. But you need to have a level of self-reflection and self-awareness to kind of figure out what's going on. Or at least, you know, when you go to a practitioner saying, you know, I'm having this issue again and again, and then, you know, being really open when they talk about it, to, you know, share, like, what is it you're really thinking, you know? And if you think we're judging you, know that we probably had the same thoughts about ourselves at some point, at least, if not currently. And actually, sometimes you may kick something up in your practitioner that they're like, oh, wow, I was holding that too. Well, here, let's clear this for both of us, right? So a lot of times, you know, in looking in somebody else's, you can kind of start to see, like, oh, I never thought about it like that.
Right.
It's really, I think it's helpful. And, you know, also to say, you know, as a practitioner, you know, hey, if I'm clearing this in them, just make that for me too. Okay. I'll take that. I'll have what she's having.
Yeah. It's so funny to me, you know, how often it has happened that, you know, I'll be working with a client and they're coming to me with the exact same piece that I've been in the middle of trying to work myself. So
and then it's easier for you to see in them because you can see it from the outside.
Yep.
And then that becomes a mirror for yourself, and you go like, oh, okay, yeah, right there, you know, pick that out there. But yeah, and it does help to be in support. And I want to distinguish between this unraveling aspect or unwinding, between that and just positive thinking, because you know, I've stand in the mirror and said stuff to myself the whole time, and you know, and that inner voice says, it's a lie, 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 it's a lie.
Right.
And I, you know, if you're just having positive thinking, it's sort of like just being on the surface,
bypassing.
Yeah, and not getting down to that root. And so the way to get down there is really to question when that stuff comes up, not to suppress those thoughts that come up, because then you just shove them down to where you can't see them. And when they're, you know, they're driving from the back seat going,
right. So instead of, I hear myself saying this is a lie, we're going to shove that to the side and focus even harder on these positive affirmations.
Right.
Why am I saying this to myself?
You know,
where is this coming from?
Yeah, and you know, because we're I want to feel good all the time too, great, right? But
Right.
we have to allow space for the other emotions to come through.
Yeah.
A lot of what we're feeling right now, I'm like, I have heaviness on my chest every day.
Yeah.
And what that is grief.
Mm-hmm.
And people are like, why are you grieving? I'm like, well, there's 300,000 people that have died this year in this country.
Yep.
I mean, that's just here, right?
Yep.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge. Our whole society has been brought to almost a standstill. Even if it wasn't working for a lot of us, it's what we knew. It's what we were raised for, in a sense, what we were trained for.
We knew how to function in that space.
Right. And so there's a grief to letting go of that.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to feel that, and we have to allow for that, and we have to allow those thoughts to rise up, as bad as they can be, the hopelessness ones, and really start to sit with them and going, okay, no, that feels and that could happen. Is this really true? Do I know if that's it? Because we like to project
right
in our heads and think that we know what's going to happen, when of course we really don't.
Right.
Because even when you go and you get a reading, this is probable futures, right, that we're reading. These have not happened yet. They can all change depending on what we do and what other people do as well.
Right.
So it's really, it's kind of egotistic to think that we know how things are going to play out.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
But the ego needs that sense of certainty. It really wants again, the ego gets it's been demonized quite a bit in the spiritual community. But what the ego is, just like the parent, it is trying to protect you. It's trying to provide for your needs.
Yep.
And so you don't want to get rid of it. You don't want to punish it. You don't want to, label it as bad. You just want to be aware of it.
Understand its motivations.
Right. Understand the motivations and see, how can we work together?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Because the id on its own, you don't want them running around in control either.
Right.
I mean,
right.
Let's just do what we want when we want. I'll do what I want, right? I don't care about anybody else. I'll just do what I want. You have that? I'll just take that from you. That's not good either. I mean,
yeah.
So it's, it's this really balance. And, but curses come in, and they come in first through that ego, and then they sink into the deep subconscious. We wrap our identity, our conception of our identities around them. And then the story of our life circles around that identity, and the story of our life controls our events, controls what we do, controls where we go, how we move through the world. Mm-hmm. And so it's really about, we see out here easy. Then we go back, we move back into our story. Right. From our story, we move into our identity, and then what's true and what's not true. And so, I talked about getting here and self-talk. When I started at the root chakra, and I, was doing the first medicine journey and the wheel for that, the serpent was the first step on the wheel for me. It's the south direction, and it's like shedding the past, shedding your skin. And she says, you have a lot of curses right here in the root chakra. She's like, so much. People have just projected so much on you, and you've just taken it. And that was a whole year process to move through that whole wheel.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And it was traumatic.
Yeah, you've mentioned that before.
Yeah, it was not easy. And sacral, same thing. A lot of stuff that was there, really painful stuff in there emotionally. Even some physical issues came up. Moving into the solar plexus, that's when I started to notice like outward changes.
Mm-hmm.
in my life, like stuff that I was doing changed. And heart, you know, a lot clearer on relations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where I have blocked love, you know. And so now here it's sort of like, what are you calling in?
Mm-hmm.
What are you creating with your words? How are you speaking to yourself? Because if you speak to yourself kindly, you're more likely to speak to others kindly.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's fascinating work, and there's so, I mean, you know, I've been on, you know, this journey for myself too for, you know, several years now, and you know, I'm able to look and recognize, you know, the distance that I've traveled and how much that I've been able to heal and grow and expand and shift, and then still understand that, you know, there's still a lot there. It's kind of, you know,
Yeah.
it's the work of a lifetime.
Or several, you know.
Or several. Yes,
Let's
absolutely.
just run some concurrent lives right now so I can be done, right? Well, but then there'll be something else that we explore and play with and a different level of
Yeah.
beingness. So I mean, it's so funny. I remember someone saying, you know, if you think you've got it all figured out, you're definitely coming back.
Right. Right.
Because I was, you know, at a time, it was at a time in my life where I was very challenged, struggling a lot and a lot of pain. And I was just like, I just want this to be it. Right.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, that means you're going to come back. I was like, ah, crap. Yeah. Except I didn't say crap.
Right. Right. Yeah. I know that. I know that feeling very, very well. Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm kind of resigned at this point. I'm like, yeah, I'll be back.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
I'll have cleared some of this, you know,
Yeah.
and we'll explore something else and we'll have, you know, different adventures. But I think, you know, we start with that intent that I'm going to remove the lies that I believe about myself. And just like with, you know, I say there's the common curses and the uncommon curses. If you remove all the lies that you believe about yourself, I don't care how powerful somebody is and what they call up, nothing's
Right.
going to stick to you
Yeah.
because you know who you are.
Right. Right.
And you know that that person doesn't get to tell you who you are, no matter what they bring with them. And I think that is the power. You know, people like, oh, it's not as sexy doing just like the common curse, the what I call the common curses, working with those. No, it's not sexy at all.
Right.
Um, you will see sparks fly if we actually work with an actual, you know, like spell work curse, and you know, and it's like, yeah, you'll see special effects with that, sure. But that really is wasted power.
Right.
Because if you do your work consistently and remove stuff, there's just less things for people to hit. I mean, it's like
Which
you're
is, I
taking
mean,
the
yeah.
target off of yourself, basically.
Yeah.
Because I've been targeted many times.
Yeah.
Which is how I learned a lot of the stuff that I learned, because this is like, what's happening? Oh, someone's doing something. Oh, what do I do about that? Okay.
Right. Right.
And I got tired of doing that. And I was just like, you know, because people, when you employ boundaries with certain people, they don't like it. And if they've got power behind it, they like to throw that power around.
Right.
And I was just, you know, if I just did more of my work and just keep at it, there's just less of me to hit.
Yeah.
There's less of what's not me, because that's the only thing that can be hit is what's not you.
Right. 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 That's huge. It's kind of everything, really.
Yeah. So the more you do your own work, the harder it is for other things to mess with you.
Yeah. Whether it's other people or yourself and your self-talk. Absolutely.
Yeah. Whether it's other people, the situation, your family. I mean, if you know who you are without a shadow of a doubt, it's, I am blank, and
Yeah.
that word I am. And if you know it and you
Yes.
speak it and you have the power of creation within you and you speak that and you know it's the truth, that's really powerful. That can clear a room.
Yes.
And, one of the things that came up for me, which I'll share, as I've been working through some of this, is that, one thing I know without a shadow of a doubt about myself is that I was created to be helpful.
Yeah.
That is part of who I am. That cannot be stopped because that is what I was created to be.
Yeah.
So
that's huge.
And when you find, and that's just one thing.
Right.
It's like, but that's a piece of it, and I always think of, if you want to see a really statement of power, I always love Lord of the Rings when Gandalf stands on that bridge.
Yes. Yeah.
And he says, you shall not pass, and boom.
Yeah.
But the real power of it is what he says before that. He says, I'm a servant of the secret fire.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back and, and this, I'm going to, the Tolkien nerd. Okay, just saying that right now.
Tolkien nerd alert.
But what that means, if you read the Silmarillion, and most of you haven't, because it's a dry read. But
I have not.
In the Legendarium of Tolkien, what that means is that the creator himself, to give substance to his will, to create, he can create something and just be like a pretty picture, but for it to come alive, only the creator has the secret fire, and that is what animates all things. That is the seed of the divine in it. Right. And so when he says, I am a servant of the secret fire, it's like, boom.
Yeah.
Like every time I hear it, it almost brings tears to my eyes, because it is a statement of power, of saying like, look, buddy, I was put here by the creator and I am serving his, their will right now, and you shall not pass.
Yeah.
So that's not saying that it's not only am I saying you shall not pass, but the power that created the universe is telling you you're not going to pass. Yeah. And when we find out who we are by removing the veil of lies that we have woven around ourselves, both intentionally and unintentionally by picking things up, we have access to that power, and we can do amazing things. Maybe not, it doesn't always have to be magical. It can just be, powerful things, because a lot of the way we think about in metaphysics, we think about miraculous things, like something that is unexplainable. But sometimes the miraculous thing is being able to stand up when everybody else says you're wrong, and you say, no, this is not right, and I will not stand for it.
Yeah. And you are in power.
Yeah. Yeah. Or demanding what you deserve. And that is just as powerful as any twinkling lights that you can get. More powerful.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Hands down.
That is why we have to do this difficult work, is so that we can get there, and that we can just show up and be who we are. Yeah. Yeah. I got passionate there for a minute. I was like, whoa!
No, it was amazing. It was amazing. No, that's
because I've done that. If you do this kind of work and you have to do some of the stuff that I have to do, you have to come in and say, boom, no, out now. Yeah. And it's not, it's not me that is the big power in the room. It's like, I know who I'm serving. I know why I'm here, and you're not supposed to be here, and you need to leave now.
Yeah, that is huge. That is huge. Yeah, we got a couple of comments here. And as we're wrapping up here, guys, if there's anybody that has any last minute questions for us, please feel free and drop those in the comments. It looks like Barbara was on with us. She said, good job, you two. Thank you for your work. She had to drop off. And Laura said, beautiful work. So thank you. Thank you guys for being here with us tonight.
I'm so glad.
Thank you very much. This has been a wonderful conversation. So we will have to continue this.
Yeah, I was like, maybe we can, do some stuff with some people next time, because I was intending to do that. I didn't have stuff prepared, but it's, there's so much to talk about, to lay the groundwork, like this is what we're talking about, because there's so many misconceptions about curses and what they are and what they do.
Absolutely.
And how they work.
And they really are. They are things that we carry around in us and with us all the time that we don't even, like, you know, it's like having that piece of gum in the bottom of your purse. You don't think about it. It's there all the time, but it's, you know.
Then your hand hits it and you're like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. And it's
then you get in your hair and it's like all of it.
Yep.
Yeah,
so it's, you know, those little things that we carry and just accept as part of our baseline when they really don't have to be.
Yeah.
So that's huge. Great conversation. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. And we'll you know, we'll have to figure out a time for us to pick this up and, like you said, maybe do some work with some folks. I think we should probably in the new year, sometime in January, because the new year is a good time to start addressing, because people are already thinking about that. I'm not talking about resolutions. I'm talking about, like, let's start to pick apart some stuff that's within ourselves. What do we want to let go of this year?
Yeah, and just like let's focus in a bit and, you know, see what we can do to like start to open up. And again, it's a process. It's not like, this is not all at once. This is like, we're going to start this, and we have to really adapt and change our way of our viewing ourselves.
And I think too, I mean, you know, even though I think a lot of times we go into this work thinking that we want to, you know, I just want to pluck whatever that is out and chuck it to the side and keep on rolling. But there's so...
Nope, don't do that.
Well, and for really good reasons, you know, obviously, because, you know, we have, like we talked about integration before, that's really important, but also there's a lot of beauty that, you know, when we are able to understand all the entanglements and how they've impacted us and where they've come, you know, where we got them from and how we may be passing them on. You know, it's a beautiful process a lot of times, even when it's difficult.
Yeah, and you know, part of that process too is that anger can get released too when you realize where it came from, and you're like, oh.
Especially if you haven't been able to tap into that for a while.
Right.
That's
So I mean, there is power in anger. It is like rocket fuel. You just have to be careful how you use it.
Right. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. For those of you that are still here with us this evening, and Jamie, you're very welcome. Jamie said thank you and pass on love to us. Love you too, Jamie. Thank you for being here. Thomas's links are in the description. So if you want to learn more about how to work with Thomas, definitely check out the links, and it will tap you into his YouTube and his Patreon and websites and all of that stuff. And then we will have you back on here with us very soon.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay. This has been a great conversation. And we will be talking to everybody very soon.
Yeah. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Absolutely. All right.